Hello and welcome to the next edition of DEEPTalks. This is an event under the Deep Vents banner, and DEEP stands for Dialogue, Empathic Engagement, and Peace Building. My name's Kevin Brenneman, and I'll be hosting today with Wiebke Geringa and Leni Vesteman. Today we have a very special guest, Marisol Back, and she will be sharing with us her Ph.D. dissertation. She just finished writing, and we'll get to all that. But let me just jump to Marisol. Please welcome to the show.
Hello. Hello. Thank you. Yeah, not yet defended, so it's in process. Thank you very much for having me here.
Well, it's wonderful to have you on. And let's start with a little bit about you. Can you tell us a bit about yourself and where are you and what are you doing and
Sure.
what brought you to this point in time?
Okay, I'm just going to start sharing my screen. I hope everyone can see this. So I am in Madrid right now. I live in the countryside. And I thought, well, when I was preparing the slides, I had a cover slide. And then before the cover slide, I decided to put up this other slide that says, well, you know, this is where I'm speaking from. And I think that's really important for people to hear and yeah, to recognize the kind of the author of these thoughts or the person who has read and thought about those things that are being said, so we can interact in a more fluid way. Yeah. So on the top right, you kind of see the more logical date oriented list of things that might be important here. So I know you people, Kevin, Lena, Wiebke, and some of you who are here from the Peace Master Program in Castellón at the Jaume I University, where I finished my master's in 2015, Peace, Conflict, and Development. And then, yeah, and I'm a PhD candidate, so I'm still going to defend my PhD. And I just decided to put that on the list as well, that I'm in this neo-rural lifestyle. You can't see it now because I'm in the city, but usually I'm in the countryside. Quite happy I'm in the city now because the connection is better here.
Just a quick thought, but the city is Candeleda, right?
Right. So right now I'm in Madrid, so in the big city, but Candeleda is a small town that people people refer to it as a village, a pueblo in Spain, about 150 kilometers towards Portugal from Madrid. And yeah, that's where I usually live. And so I'm starting, so I decided to speak about this topic because I really feel that I wanted to have a space to share this a bit more informally, also before defending the thesis. And I think it's really important and interesting to have dialogue about these topics. So the place that I wanted to start from, or that the ideas that I bring into the space before I even chose my topic are that, well, peace is a value. I think that's for many peace workers or people from the peace studies field, that's an interesting aspect, right? We research and we read about peace and we learn about peace because we strive for peace. And also my idea was, well, I'm interested in structural and cultural change, not just in very specific conflicts, armed conflicts. All of this is very important, but for me, it felt more like I needed an eagle eye perspective or large scale, deep change. And also change from within, starting with the self and surroundings, and some way to unite theory and practice. right?
Marisol, just a quick side question, but your bachelor didn't have much to do with peace studies, or was there a connection before you started the master and PhD?
So my bachelor's is in cultural studies, in arts and culture, actually, in Maastricht University. And for me, I keep saying, like, this is where I studied everything and nothing, where I learned how to learn a bit. And so it didn't have so much to do, but it did give me like a foundation to start thinking, and then realize, wow, this is great. We can actually study something with a normative component, with a part that says, well, I'm doing this because I believe in this and that, and not just pretending to be neutral in the academic world, which was very much like that in the bachelor's program. Yeah. So yeah.
A real quick side point, but the university, if you don't know where it is for the audience, it's on the Mediterranean coast, on the east coast of Spain, about 45 minutes north of Valencia, in a small town or small city called Castellón de la Plana.
There you go. Yeah, exactly. So should I just start introducing the topic and you interrupt me? I love that, because then I don't, get lost in my own.
Perfect. Yeah. We'll just start and define things as we go, and zoom in or zoom out, and
great connection. Cool. Yeah. Okay, so let's see if I can. So this was the cover slide, and you can see a picture on the right that it's a painting by Nancy Jackson called "The Way It Works," and I really liked that, and I actually used it on the cover of my thesis. She's an artist who lives in the US, and I met her and asked her whether I could use this painting of hers, and she was delighted, because she said, yeah, I think that has a lot to do with your topic. And then she asked me whether I had realized that below that plant you see, those are skeletons and skulls and people. And I had already chosen to use that picture because it felt like, there's something being transformed here. I could kind of intuit that they were maybe people. And then she sent me a zoomed in version of the picture, of the painting. And it kind of still felt right. So I decided to stick with it. And it felt right because degrowth, kind of, if you don't know the topic, feels like the opposite of growth, or like shrinking, or like something like that, right? And so I wanted to have an image to challenge that view. Yeah, just as a quick side note. This is how I want to go about this talk today. In the middle, you might think it's a brain, but it's a maze. Maybe it's both. And I'm going to read something to you. Many of you might be familiar with Charles Eisenstein, the author, philosopher, thinker. He wrote a book called Climate, A New Story. And I want to start with that because I adhere to the way he tells this little story in the prologue. And it's called Lost in the Maze. And contrary to what we might see here in this picture, well, we think, well, we can find the way out together. And it's quite clear what way that is once you figure it out. But here in this reality and the topics that we're covering today, I wanted to share from the beginning that I don't feel that there is one way out that is clear, and I'm going to show that way, or I know what it is. No. So here we go, the story. Probably not going to read the whole thing, but for you to get an idea. Once upon a time, a man was lost in a maze. How he got there is another story. To learn a mystery, perhaps, or to find a treasure. In any case, by now he has forgotten how or why he came to be there. He holds on to a faint memory of a sunlit realm, or a memory of a memory, that tells him that the maze isn't the whole of reality. He got there somehow, and there must be a way out. And lately, it has become more and more painful to be inside. The maze is getting hotter and hotter, and he knows he will die if he doesn't find the exit soon. What once was an exciting exploration has become a monstrous trap. So then he frantically races around seeking the way out, and he goes left, right, up, down, runs in circles, hitting dead ends, turning back. And then he has a comedy of voices in his head offering him advice, how to run faster, how to choose smarter. And every way out that he tries always results in the same, in a dead end. And so there's this other quieter voice that's telling him, stop. You aren't getting anywhere, just stop. And then he has this dialogue in his head going, well, you cannot stop, you cannot rest. Only by using your 2 feet you will ever get out of here. You have to move fast. Now is the time for action. After that, you can rest. And so he runs faster. And then once again, he finds himself at the center of the maze, and so on and so on. Until, well, I invite you to read the book, definitely. He finally finds a moment to calm down and to just sit and listen to that voice and to wait. So there's this pausing to think element that I wanted to invite us to bring into the room, and also in general to have for our way of going about these topics. It's actually a beautiful ending, and it was really touching for me. So yeah, I guess you might intuit what that could be.
Is lost in the maze kind of a metaphor for growth economics for you?
Could be, yeah, for me, definitely. It's for growth economics, but you could also use any other title of things that are related to this way of economics, yeah. In fact, I wanted to continue with a little super short exercise that colleagues have also used in different workshops on degrowth. And I wanted to try it in a slightly different way. So if you feel comfortable with that, turning on your camera and in one gesture, or if you prefer, you can also use a piece of paper and make a very, very simple drawing. I invite you to show what a healthy economy would look like in the simplest possible way. And I give you, 10 seconds to prepare. Okay, maybe just turn on your cameras if you can. If you can't, that's totally fine. And maybe have a little countdown. Kevin, do you want to count down?
Yeah, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Okay.
If you have something.
All right. Beautiful.
And we have one text, two hands handing goods to each other. Wonderful.
Great. Okay, thank you for sharing. There's going to be only one more of these. So if you want, you can leave your cameras on. Now I invite you to use a gesture or whatever you have, whatever you want, or a drawing to show what our current global economy looks like. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Great. Beautiful. All right. Yeah. Yeah. It looks very disruptive. Okay.
And one chat, dead end road.
All right. Yeah. Good stuff. Okay. This was just to know whether we had anyone who who's here and wants to give me some counter voice. That's also fine. Okay, I think I need to move this thing so you can see my, give me a second, sorry. So you can see my picture again. Yeah. Is that good, Kevin?
Yeah, we can see the how to go about this slide.
Oh, okay, perfect. So then we had the 1 minute exercise, that's done. Thank you for sharing, just to get inspired. And now, yeah, so this is just a little input. This is how I divided the problem when I defined it in my thesis. So there are many ways to speak about this, but global interlocking crises is kind of the word, the concept that I kept using. There are so many crises, and I wanted to brainstorm with you people what kind of crises we can think of, but it didn't feel right. So maybe just think that there are many kinds of ways in which crisis can express itself. And nowadays, in this globalized world, everything is interconnected. I guess it's always been, but now we realize even more. And so I divided the crises into the three first points that I wrote down there: economy, ecology, and social or society. And then there was the COVID-19 pandemic, and I could not write about that, but I tried to keep it at the margin. And then there's this of the imaginary, okay? It's a crisis of the imaginary, and it's not an adjective, it's actually a noun. And this is a word that's used by the philosopher called Cornelius Castoriadis from 1975 in his book, The Imaginary Institution of Society. And basically, just to really sum it up, it refers to, well, in this context, it refers to the existence of a crisis that is in our heads, that is the fact that from a degrowth perspective, we cannot think of life without economic growth, because we're going to speak about what degrowth is right now, but degrowth is about economics. But it's not only about that, because it sees that the economy is linked to the ecology and to society, the way the social inequalities. And so I'm just going to move towards the, yeah, maybe we should have had this question before, but okay, I just shift to this slide. I wanted to have two questions answered to see what you people think, or maybe intuit or feel rather than think too much. Okay, and then we continue. Kevin, could you work with this?
Yeah,
And
and so
explain?
if you haven't used Mentimeter before, there's a website, www.menti.com, and you can use your handphones or cell phone, go to the website, and if you put the code in 44610991, it'll allow you to contribute different words or phrases, and then we'll see all of these concepts on the screen. No. I think Marisol, you might have to stop sharing your screen for a moment.
Okay, 1 second.
Can anyone see the Mentimeter website? Actually, it's okay, I think.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, let's try this. All right, so. But I don't see any words pop up yet.
I'm not sharing my screen anymore. Yeah, there we go.
Okay, excellent. And you're welcome to put as many words as you'd like. Okay, we've got quite a few good terms here. Unconscious greedy egoism, capitalism, mental infrastructure, individualism, demands as food or travel, mindsets change slowly, mutual dependencies, fear, ignorance, lack of solidarity, grieve, power, separation, ignorance, disconnect, mistrust, collective trauma, rugged individualism, need for control, and structural change. And Marisol, in your dissertation, did you have any specific premise in terms of the causes when you explored? I mean, degrowth is a major concept, but was there anything in particular in that?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I kind of took degrowth as a starting point. So I kind of followed that idea of, okay, this is what degrowth says, and let's see how we can work with that. And what degrowth says is something that I wanted to explain right now, briefly. So maybe I can just go into that and then share a little more of my personal view on that. But thank you for sharing this. I like this Mentimeter. Yeah, we still have a second question, but let's leave that for later. And I'm just going to share my screen again. Okay. Yes. Let's see. A moment. Here. Do you see degrowth? Tool 1? Okay. So when I wrote these slides, I was like, okay, let's be really practical, because otherwise it's impossible to write down everything I want to share. So I just, I'm going to explain degrowth, feminisms, and pieces as tools, and I hope to relate them to each other, and then in conversation, just like we're doing now, find out how they're related and how they can actually help us for social transformation. Okay. So yeah, this is just a very brief introduction and definition of degrowth. So the very first point is, yeah, degrowth sees growth, and by that it means economic growth, as the root cause of global interlocking crises. Yeah. So we're starting from an idea, the idea that the economy must grow infinitely. And we know since at least 1972, which is when the Club of Rome published a report called The Limits to Growth, or The Limits of Growth. I think it's The Limits to Growth. We know that the planet can only take so much, yeah? And that there are limits. That this is something that we all know nowadays, that we can only pollute this much, and the Earth can only absorb this much pollution and waste, and only has a limited, limited resources. So from this Club of Rome report, then other reports were published, books were published, and a series of measures were taken. And this is also where the sustainability idea emerged, right? But degrowth is not in line with sustainability because it questions the way in which sustainability was used and misused and even hijacked, yeah. Degrowth advocates say that the term sustainability, that has these three components of, well, economics, ecology, and the social side, it was hijacked by businesses, because within the economics aspect of this sustainability idea that everyone must now follow, there we still find the necessity to continue growing. And okay, I'm going to pause here and then continue with the slide, because degrowth then emerges as an activist slogan that also later becomes an interdisciplinary science. And it is first a bunch of people saying, we want car-free cities, we offer meals in the streets, we create food cooperations, we're in favor of veganism, vegetarianism, alternative currencies, etc., etc. And then on the theory side, theory starts building, and then there's a first conference in Paris, and it says, well, this degrowth, what it wants is, it aims to downscale production, consumption, and extraction in a democratic way, and also non-violently, towards sustainable livelihoods. There you can see the little star, because sustainable is a word, as I just said, that has been so misused and misunderstood that it's no longer clear what it means, in the sense that when we speak sustainability, we might be speaking of, well, is this sustainable for your business? Can you still gain a lot of money from this? Yeah. So here is a new word, décroissance in French, or degrowth in English. In German, they also use Postwachstum, like post-growth. And it is a missile concept, which I find really interesting from a peace studies perspective. It's like, they call it a missile concept because it cannot be hijacked, because it says, well, sustainable growth does not go together. That's an oxymoron, yeah? It's a contradiction in itself. So we have to use a concept that says, that points its finger at the problem and says, this is the issue. And the issue is, we must question growth. So the word in itself is spiky, yeah? So then, but the intention is a transformation of societies to ensure environmental justice and a good life for all within planetary boundaries. So that really resonated with me when I understood what degrowth means and is looking for, and when I understood why they chose this term that is sometimes difficult to understand, or that sounds very anti-everything. Yeah.
You're kind of saying that the term degrowth can't be greenwashed and put in a pretty ad.
There you go. There you go. It can't. And but there are some problems with the term. And here you can see an image that we find in also on the Degrowth website. And degrowth supporters are constantly busy explaining what degrowth is not, because people who criticize degrowth often come from a place where they say recession equals degrowth, or degrowth equals, instead of a growing GDP, we have a shrinking GDP, and that's horrible. And degrowth advocates agree with this, yeah, because, so you see the first elephant saying more of the same is growth. This is kind of the way things are working right now. Growth is all over the place. It's in our heads, in the way that we continue consuming, producing, and extracting resources. And then there's the same of the same. It's interesting, but it's not exactly degrowth. Sorry, there's some background noise here. And this is called a stationary state. And then there's less of the same, which would be a shrinking economy. And that would be a nightmare if we don't have, values and a system of societal change that accompany that. So here we do speak of recession, and that would result in, well, job loss and grievance and all kinds of problems. So that's why we have this snail representing degrowth and saying, well, degrowth is simply different. Why a snail? I guess we associate the snail with being slow. And the slowness is interesting because when we start imagining a degrowth society or try to live in a degrowth way, we question productivity, for example, and we question all those hours that we spend on our paid job. And rather than being paid for 40 hours a week, we decide maybe to work for 20, 30, and then have more time. And you can, of course, decide to take that to the extreme in many ways. So if you remember, there's this crisis of the imaginary, of the ways we understand the world as a collective. So here you can see that degrowth goes hand in hand with imagining a new way of living, or with shifting the imaginary and decolonizing our minds that are colonized by the idea of growth as a necessity. Yeah.
If I could just to refresh everyone's memory, and correct me if I'm wrong, but within degrowth, you divide this into several strands, right?
Yeah.
So you were just referring to the imaginary strand, but you also have the ecological, the social, and the economical strand.
Yes, kind of. Here you can see it on the slide, on the next slide. Degrowth partially comes from an ecological economics perspective. This is a field that understands that, or that sees economics as completely related to and conditioned by the ecology, obviously, because economics happens on this earth plane, and this is where we have planetary boundaries. So one of the strands is the bioeconomic strand, which kind of responds to both the economic and the ecological crises. I was also hesitant, and I didn't do it in the end, to collect data on all the ways in which we are facing these crises. And I'm just going to kind of maybe give a few keywords, and whoever doesn't or would like to learn more, it's all over the place. Yeah, by economic crises, I guess that the main reference is the 2008 economic or financial crash and the crisis that resulted from that, and also the crisis that we're about to face or starting to face right now, due to the pandemic as well. But then there's also the ecological crisis, in plural, where we have, well, biodiversity loss. We're in the 6th mass extinction at the global scale. We have a bunch of issues besides climate change, or the climate crisis, as some people prefer to call it, that are important and that are part of this crisis. And then the social aspect of degrowth addresses mainly, well, the social crises that we are facing, but it does that from a material, mainly materialist perspective, in the sense that it looks at inequality and understands poverty as materialized inequality. Yeah. So we have a problem of redistribution here. Because once we abandon the idea that, as they say, a rising tide lifts all boats, or kind of, if the cake grows, then everyone will have a piece. If we abandon that because it hasn't worked, it has never really worked, then we have to redistribute that cake, yes, because the cake is limited. So this is the social aspect, or the social strand of degrowth. And then there's the imaginary. And I guess this kind of work that I'm doing and that many are doing is also an exercise for the imaginary. It tries to get us into this place where we can say, hey, what do we need to change? How can we get out of this maze that doesn't seem to have any way out? Because, well, as you might know, degrowth is not on the political agenda of any state in the world in that sense. So we have to start imagining those alternatives and start leaving that elephant image and going into the snail image and seeing what does that mean? How can we do this? Yeah. Okay, I hope everything is clear so far. I'm just gonna continue, but you can interrupt me, Kevin. So there are two words that represent two main strategies of degrowth They're borrowed by Edgar Olin Wright. This is a critic of capitalism, a contemporary critic of capitalism. And he divides transformation into two strategies. And this has also entered degrowth discourse and degrowth dialogue. And maybe those two images represent the ways in which they differ. So the first one is kind of the very basic flower in the crack kind of resistance within a breaking system way that transformation can happen. So decentralized, local, small scale, alternatives within the system, within the niche and the margins of the system, yes? And this for many was the main strategy to follow degrowth from the beginning within the movement, because it didn't feel like we were ready at a social level to start really moving towards degrowth at a large scale. And so the symbiotic reform is more of that. It's an idea of how can we take the state and how can we take the power structures that we have in place with us to reform ourselves and our systems in a non-reformist way. So in a deep way, in a profound way. And this is also an aspect that was dealt with in the Vienna Degrowth Conference that was held last year, during the pandemic. Time to think about strategy was the subtitle or the slogan, because these interstitial transformations are kind of the easy way, in the sense that you as an individual, if you're in the global north, if you have certain amount of freedom or a capacity also to sustain yourself, not the fear of, you're well off enough so that you can decide to live a voluntary simplicity life, yes? Or you go and live in the forest and only work from time to time, and you experiment. And you ride bicycles, reuse, recycle, join co-housing projects, agroecology, eco-village projects, join solidarity economics structures, and all these things that are happening that are very interesting and important. But then this time to think about strategy idea that emerged and that had a certain urgency also in this last degrowth conference has something to do with the fact that within politics and within like larger social structures, degrowth is still very much unpopular because it feels so wrong for so many. And because could be a huge list, and you could explain, I guess, from many different perspectives of vested interests of the those who have invested in power and have their structures set up, etc., etc. But the question for the symbiotic reforms is, how can we put life in the center of our economic systems again? And by again, I mean, if we look at economic systems before the rise of capitalism, there was trade, there were other ways of dealing with economy. And it's maybe good to bear in mind that the word economy comes from managing the household, from Greek. So how can we manage the household differently? Okay, let's see, that was tool 1. If there are any urgent questions so far, we can address them. Otherwise, I would just continue with
just to comment on it, but maybe if anyone else has questions, they could also ask during, if that's okay.
Sure.
Okay. So if you have a question, feel free anytime to chime in and raise your hand or
Perfect.
send a text. Yeah.
Okay. So tool number 2, feminisms in plural. So first of all, why feminism? What does this have to do? Like, couldn't you decide upon a thesis topic? So you took both. Well, it's actually true that I couldn't decide upon a thesis topic, and I took both, but I tried to look at the ways in which they are related and they overlap. And I actually already dealt with this issue back in 2015 when I was writing my master's thesis. And this was a year before the Feminisms and Degrowth Alliance was founded. And I was so happy when I discovered that, because that's exactly what I was looking for. An alliance or an idea of, wait a minute, we have this very interesting movement called feminism that is already kind of successful, also controversial, and also with all these other aspects, and that I endorse and I find important, and that within peace studies is also, yeah, it's an aspect, or it's appreciated, at least in our school. They've mentioned that, you know, feminisms is a transversal aspect. That's actually from Spanish. I don't know if this word exists in English, but it's an integral part of peace studies. And so we need to keep looking at how we can address these issues from a feminist perspective. This is just briefly the why. So degrowth actually draws from ideas that come from ecological economics, post-colonial theory, and feminist theory. And the other idea is, well, why feminism? Well, if degrowth is not feminist, it is unjust, and thus it cannot be peaceful. And finally, well, this reference of the Feminisms and Degrowth Alliance, the idea of this group of people that I also joined is to make feminism or feminist theorization an integral part of degrowth reasoning. And I'm just going to go into what I actually mean by feminism. Okay. So here we can see that multiple definitions of feminism exist. And this is a huge Pandora's box, but I don't know how we're going to open it a little bit and then deal with it, but that was my intention. So here we go. In the middle, you find a standard dictionary definition of feminism that says that it is the theory of the political, economic, and social equality of the sexes. And it's also organized activity, so kind of the action side of that, on behalf of women's rights and interests. Okay. So just to clarify, this always reminds me of some gender-based violence workshops that we gave here in Madrid, where some kids thought, well, feminism is the opposite of machismo. Yeah, I don't know how you would say. Would you say machismo? Not really. Chauvinism, maybe.
Chauvinism, yeah.
So this is, no, it's not the opposite. Feminism is a theory that seeks equality of the sexes, and it's also practice. And we're trying to, well, it exists because it's necessary from this perspective of, once you start looking into these kind of patriarchal structures, you realize what feminism is looking for. So that's why you have the sentence, feminism is the radical notion that women are people. Yeah, you might have seen it on some t-shirt or heard it around. It is not necessarily more than that, but it can also be more. And so bell hooks on the bottom right corner says, well, feminism is a movement to end sexism, sexist exploitation, and oppression. So this is kind of the other extreme. It's so much more. It's we need to end oppression. Feminism is going to help us with this. Yeah. And I'm more on the bell hooks side, in the sense that I have learned that feminism is a very powerful tool to start understanding oppression and to start dismantling or analyzing, at least, how oppression works and where things need to change. So here's a little very, very brief picture of, okay, the norms of patriarchy. This is very much simplified, yes, but you would see, well, the male is above the female. They're different from each other, and one is above the other. And patriarchy, you could define patriarchy as institutionalized sexism, which also includes benevolent sexism, meaning a man holding a door open for a woman and doing all these things that are very benevolent, but that are within the patriarchal structure, and that can be really confusing for both, for men and women. Anyways, back on track. Gender is determined by biological binary sex. Man is above woman. Man behaves as man. Yeah, so you now have to have all these stereotypes in your head of what it means to be a man. Woman behaves as woman. Man loves woman, and woman loves man. So it's actually heteropatriarchy we're talking about. So why is this important? Well, I guess it speaks for itself in many ways, but this set of ideas has also been explained in, for example, an author called Val Plumwood. She's an ecofeminist, and she wrote a book about the master model, or she spoke about the master model, where there are all these binaries of man, woman, culture, nature, white, non-white. Yeah, you see always the first pair, the first of the pair is above the other. Yeah, hetero, queer, human, animal. And so comes to a point where we see that, for example, within this way of thinking, you can suddenly understand how women who are in a patriarchal structure inferior are at the same time considered closer to nature. And because men are closer to culture, and then women are closer to nature. And this is a very problematic idea that is also spoken about in ecofeminist literature. And that has something to do with degrowth because of the ecological aspect. I'm going to try and explain that right now. So just briefly, yeah. As we could see in this slide, multiple definitions and different kinds of feminism coexist, and not all kinds fit degrowth. Why did I say this? I'm not going to go very deep into it, but just short. What I observe is in the media and in the ways in which many people speak about feminism, it seems like the only aims of the feminist movement, or the main aim of the feminist movement, would be to close the gender pay gap and to, yes, they do address direct violence, so to end femicide and rape and all these very direct violence aspects of patriarchy. But there is, it seems like feminism could reach its goal if only women had the same status as men within the same system. And this is something that could be attributed to liberal feminist perspectives, and that from a degrowth view would not work, because degrowth seeks to dismantle the whole structure that is based on this idea that we need to grow. And that is ingrained in the capitalist system. So in my work, I identified 4 aspects that I found necessary and that I used as an initial tool to also identify feminisms that would work for degrowth. And these are, well, one characteristic of a feminism that resonates with degrowth is that it pursues gender equality, which I guess all feminisms that are genuinely so do. But then there are more aspects that I kept looking for. And one is that this kind of feminism would have to be radical. And radical, I guess, for many people sounds like extremist or like terrorist, or there's all these associations. But radical, as Angela Davis once said, actually just refers to grasping things, or in this case, patriarchy, at the root. Yeah, going to the root of the problem, because the problem has deep roots, because there is a cultural violence. So there is a violence that is embedded in our culture and that we cannot even see in all of these ways in which we treat each other. And that is something that needs to be worked with. It's not enough that women can vote or that women can drive cars. And also, it's not enough that women survive. It is important, and we want to get there everywhere, but we want to go beyond this and see how can we dismantle or undo patriarchy from the bottom up, from the basis, from the more subtle places, in maybe in language, in the way we treat each other in our daily lives, in the assumptions that we have about each other. This is the way in which I understand radical feminism. And yeah, the next point is that it would have to be intersectional. This is another huge word that is very interesting to look up if you don't know it. It speaks about the intersection of different kinds of isms or ways in which a person can be oppressed due to being part of a group that is oppressed in general within the structures of our society. So we have racism, we have ageism, we have ableism, classism, and many others. So this is just a mental note that I made for myself and that I think is important for anyone who wants to research within this field is, wait a minute, maybe we should ask another question other than how do women experience this and that, or how are women treated in this situation? Because there's no such thing as the universal woman, just as there's no such thing as the universal man. Kevin, are you keeping track in case there are any questions? I'm just seeing something flashing up here. And
yeah, there was one earlier. Leah B asked if you would share the presentation later. Okay.
Yeah, we can send it to you.
Also, Elena and Johanna have to leave, but they say thank you. But I think that's it.
Thank you too. All right. Yeah, so that was the third point, the intersectionality. And then the fourth point is ecology. Yeah. Actually, I don't believe that only feminists must be ecologists. I think everyone should be, because it is we are completely eco-dependent and interdependent, but we are also eco-dependent. We need our Earth, where there's no planet B, and all these things that we are either we know or we're learning, maybe we have been learning lately. But the point of a feminism that is ecological, there are many names. You can call them ecofeminism, or you can call them ecological feminisms, or ecofeminist political ecology. There are all these terms, but they kind of refer, they integrate this ecological perspective, and they see similarities between the oppression of nature and the oppression of women. Yeah. And that is not the same as saying between nature and women. So we're not saying women are naturally closer to nature and thus feminism should be ecofeminism. This is not where I want to take this. And this is also not where most ecofeminisms go, because it's problematic to say that essentially women are closer to nature. It's a very interesting discussion that maybe we can leave for another time, how to deal with these differences. There are differences also within ecofeminist movements. And just to sum it up, the feminism that resonates with degrowth that I was looking for had these 4 qualities. And so I used this as a kind of a lens to skim through and to figure out what kinds of feminisms could enter into dialogue with degrowth, and maybe this way help each other out to find a way out of the maze. Yeah. The Feminisms and Degrowth Alliance actually also listed kinds of feminisms that could resonate with degrowth and said, well, ecofeminism, materialist feminism, post-colonial feminism, and more radical parts of feminist economics. Yeah. Why radical parts? Well, because feminist economics often sounds like this problem of the gender pay gap, which is totally legitimate, but sometimes it's maybe misinterpreted as the only aspect of it. But there's much more to that. It runs much deeper. So, okay, we're through with tool number 2. Right. Maybe just take a minute or a few seconds without thinking too much and write in the chat what peace is for you. A couple of words, a word, a phrase, sentence.
Okay, we've got solidarity, trust, a healthy whole, non-destructive arguments, equality of rights, deep connection to collective wisdom, no exploitation, being our true selves, a good feeling for all. Just a couple that from the list.
Beautiful. Yeah. So this question is actually inspired by the Innsbruck Peace Program and by Wolfgang Dietrich, who did research on this question and keeps asking his new students, or all his students, what peace is for them. And I really liked that idea because it gives us an immediate connection with the word and with the idea of peace before going into the brainy part of peace theory. Yeah. So here we go. On the left, you find a list of maybe a little brainstorm of things that peace could signify. The very first one is like, peace is the absence of war, right? This is the negative definition of peace that most of us can probably agree upon. And it is a very, very general definition. And then we move towards the kind of a more theoretical one that is based on Johann Galtung's ideas that speaks of, well, peace is more than that. It is the absence of war in the sense that it is the absence of direct violence, but it's also, it should go beyond and look at other kinds of violence, structural violence, so violence of the system, and cultural violence, the violence that we have in our heads, kind of, collectively. And then, well, the other idea that peace is a process, and it could also be an imperfect state. There we have Francisco Muñoz, who speaks about imperfect peace. Peace can be, well, it's an aim or a goal that most people, I don't know, but can resonate with. And then there's, of course, Gandhi's sentence, which he never said literally, but the idea, the message is that there is no way to peace, and peace is the way. And then many people have their own personal definition, and I would invite you to think about that. For me, even the definition of peace is also a process. So it's shifting. And so why do we speak of pieces in plural? I guess the very basic main idea is that pieces must be in plural because imposing our understanding, or anyone imposing their understanding of one piece on others, would be violent and therefore no longer peaceful. Yes. So we can see that as soon as we try to agree on a positive definition of peace, so beyond the absence of war, well, it can get complicated. And this is where the whole peace theory gets interesting as well. So now I'm going to try and connect what I mean by this pieces in the framework of degrowth. And I'm going to do that right here. So I crossed out a word there and I wrote another one, just suggesting. So in Castellón, in our Peace Masters and a PhD program, the program is called International Peace, Conflict and Development Studies. And so one semester is on peace, the other is on conflict, the third one is on development, and then you write your MA thesis. And so development is very much linked to peace in the sense that the development discourses that we are used to and that dominate tend to promise peace in the future. They say, well, if we develop, then there will be peace. If all these countries were developed, they would be peaceful and prosperous and so on. And there would be well-being and progress. And all this is linked to peace. And even the sustainable development goals of the 2030 UN Global Agenda include one goal that is number 8 that says, well, we need decent work and economic growth. So decent work for all. Who's against decent work? Of course, decent work is important. And however, economic growth is even embedded within the sustainable development goals that some critics call the sustainable survival goals, or there are other terms that are used that, well, explain how it is problematic to leave this economic growth goal within within this whole structure, within this global agenda. And so why is this so? Well, development and peace have been linked to economics for a long time, ever since the Harry Truman's inaugural speech as the US president in 1949. This whole idea started. So here you, well, maybe not this idea started, because you have further back, you have all these colonial ideas of what progress means and what barbarism is and so forth. But here we have a very specific speech by Harry Truman that I would recommend everyone to read, and where he speaks of underdevelopment and development and what that means, and that what we must embark on a mission towards development and peace, because this economic prosperity in all these underdeveloped countries will bring peace to everyone. And we have never kind of really undone this knot, or looked at this idea of why is development always related to economic development, and how can we start looking at that differently? Yeah, I'm not the only one. I propose, among others, to replace development with degrowth, at least in the global north. I say this because, well, if we speak about the global north, we're speaking about parts of the world that are economically well off in general, much more than the rest. You could also speak of the overdeveloped world and the majority world, to divide the global north and the global south. And I'm speaking about the global north because, as we saw at the beginning, degrowth emerged in France, and it is an idea that looks at change from within, right? Change from within the own system that we are part of. How can we change something if something is not working, and we identify growth as the problem? How can we shift this? So yeah, that was really important to me when I started researching that. It's not about going to a different place where I can help and solve their conflicts, but to see what system am I part of, and how can I contribute to transforming that. So here comes a huge question that I also faced in my thesis, and it is, well, if growth is so ingrained in our discourse and in our society and in our thinking, how can degrowth be promoted? I was already convinced, yes, degrowth needs to happen, because otherwise we're going to face collapse. And so it's better we do that on purpose, in a slower way, in a democratic way, etc., etc. And here we're already at the kind of last point, where I tried to put some ideas together of how I think degrowth could be promoted from that, from those feminist and pieces perspectives and other ideas that came up for me while writing. So
we do have one more Menti question.
Okay.
Which has the same idea. Should we throw that up first and then finish this slide after? Okay.
Thank you.
Same concept, menti.com, and the code that was used before, I believe. And so what do you think we need the most to overcome these crises? And I'm typing the words that are in the text or in the chat for anyone who isn't on their phone, so we can
Great.
see them. And Jan asks, which crises? Do you want to define that a little more, or?
Sure. Well, I would focus on economic, ecological, and social crises, as well as the crisis of the imaginary, if you can resonate with that.
So kind of a holistic view of everything that is under peace studies, which is a very broad umbrella topic for discipline. Like a big bag of crises, you can just dip your hand in and pick any of them. Okay, so empathy, trust, trusting there is enough, respect, sufficiency, listening to each other, education, creativity, to trigger political action, grassroots movements, satisfy basic needs, put caring first, humility, creative thinking, civil society activism, collaboration, and long-term thinking.
Great. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to share once again. Here you go. Okay. Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, here are a few ideas that came up for me, that some of which we've already talked about. So, well, the first point, strengthening the Feminisms and Degrowth Alliance would maybe be a better wording, and making feminism and not an integral part of degrowth reasoning. Okay, so here you go. This is something that is very basic to try and see degrowth from a more holistic perspective, maybe, and seeing how can degrowth become more interesting. That was kind of a question that I had again and again. And more interesting, I mean, how can it be more compelling for more people, or how can more people be invited into this project? And so another way of doing that was linking degrowth to pieces in plural. Also in the Innsbruck Peace School, or the transrational approach to peace, there is a division into different interpretations, or they call actually families, peace families, right? And they group ways in which people understand peace or pieces. And I felt that degrowth was very much in line with the justice understanding of peace. So understanding peace as justice, or degrowth has to be just in the way it works, and it's also looking for a more just world. But what about other interpretations of peace that we could talk about? For example, peace as harmony. Maybe harmony is a way of looking at peace from a more holistic perspective. Also of interrelation or interrelatedness of all beings. Yeah, maybe this consideration that we are totally part of the environment that we live in, of the ecology, and that we totally depend on that. And also we're interdependent radically. There's also this concept of interbeing that could be put into there. Charles Eisenstein refers to it, and I think it's by Thich Nhat Hanh. So you can look that up. It's a beautiful idea. So then there was another idea that I delved into, is the finding frames. So how can we frame, how can we frame degrowth? How can we make people look at degrowth by maybe using other words? We've seen that degrowth as a concept is interesting and important because it cannot be hijacked, but maybe alternative concepts such as donut economics, which is another one I wanted to throw in there that you can look up, are very interesting and resonate more with people.
Leia asks, do you like the concept of donut economics? She was thinking of this actually before the slide.
Yes, I do. I do like the concept, and I was about to put that up as well, but it was just too much. It's a great concept. It is actually being used and implemented politically in Amsterdam and maybe other places by now. I haven't followed up.
For those who might not know donut economics, could you give us just a quick sense?
Yeah. So donut economics, if you Google that, you'll find an image of a donut, because you have a circle, and within the circle there's a hole. And the point is that we have, well, the earth has limits. That's the outer limit. So we can only pollute so much, we can only use so many resources, etc. But then there's also an inner limit, which is we have certain needs that we need to cover. And so the sweet spot for humanity is in the donut. Yeah, we must be beyond a certain use of resources and all these things, but we have to stay within a limit. And so this is a very visual way of understanding and also dividing into different parts the needs on the one hand, the human needs, and the limits of the planet. And then there's the next point, this dialogue at eye level with like-minded movements, or just with other movements from the global south, such as environmental justice. There's a huge range of initiatives that go under this concept of environmental justice, and they're very much related to degrowth. They're less theoretical and more practical, and so maybe there can be alliances there. And then finally, and I'm sad and happy at the same time that we didn't speak about the coronavirus, but let's just kind of paraphrase here or hint at it. Learning from emergencies or emergences. In Spanish, the word emergencia is refers to both. Yeah, what is emerging and the emergency. And so what has emerged in this pandemic? How can the energy for deeper change be harnessed in these times of crisis? So I just wanted to leave you with that idea, and also a list of readings. So I guess it's useful for you to, if you would like to see the slides later on. There are a few links in there, and the 3 links, they're all related to degrowth initiatives that try to be very, very specific about how change could happen at the symbiotic level. And also a pandemic reflection from written by the Feminisms and Degrowth Alliance that was actually part of that initiative. There's a shorter and a longer version. So I invite you all to take a look at that and see and reflect and think together, because this is a very theoretical but also very specific action-based endeavor. So yes, this is all from my side.
Well, there's a lot of information in there, and I mean 90 minutes doesn't quite give it enough time, but if you have time, Marisol, could we open up to a few questions?
I do have time, and I'm happy for questions for sure. Okay. And anyone who'd like to leave, of course, please do.
It is 90 minutes now, but if anyone has a question, we could do a few and then say good night.
Great. I'm going to stop sharing, maybe. Yeah.
So you're welcome to speak, or if you want, you can put it in the chat and I can read it. And so I actually had a question on Nancy Jackson's photo.
Yeah.
At the very beginning, with life or this plant coming out of the bones of, looks like what might be humans, right? It's
Yeah.
What was your interpretation of that, or if you know hers as well?
Yeah, I could actually look that up if you give me a minute, because I asked her what hers was. And just shortly, mine was that it's important, well, my interpretation, let's see. I guess it basically addresses the life, death, life cycle, and shows that death is part of life. And this is very important to be aware of also within the degrowth frame, because in this consumerist, productivist, extractivist world that we're part of, it seems like death was elsewhere. It doesn't really, it's not something that we have present in our daily lives. Maybe now with the pandemic, things have changed, and there's an interesting aspect to that as well. But understanding that everything changes and that death is part of life, and that life stems from death as well. That's what really triggered me, both like also in a positive way, and that I thought was crucial to put in there without necessarily writing about it. Yeah.
The way it works, yeah, the cycle of life. Jan or Jan, depending how you pronounce it, as a question.
Yes, thanks a lot. So this is Jan. Actually, Marisol knows me as Juanita. Just wanted to say hello and thanks for the thought-provoking, let's say, expose of the work that she's been doing. For me, I stumbled across the invitation through Facebook, and yeah, it's been great. So she gets the hi from Marie and from me, and thanks for the interesting insights.
Thank
so
you,
not a
Juanito.
question, but just a comment.
Great.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah.
You might have to. Yeah. Okay, I hope I'm loud enough, since we're in the same room. You always have to make sure that only one microphone is on. First of all, thank you, Marisol. This was really, really great and interesting. I just wanted to ask you if, since you have been researching and reading about it for quite a few years now, and of course you see the potential in the concept or in it, but what do you think actually the chances are that even politically, or that it's becoming a more mainstream concept that way?
It's a very good one, Wiebke, thank you. I think it is right now really difficult and unlikely for degrowth to become a mainstream concept that people generally endorse, like, yeah, we should all be in favor of degrowth, and yeah, this is the way to go. Because to a certain extent, degrowth means dismantling the capitalist system. And as maybe you might have heard of this phrase that goes, it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. And several people have said this, so I don't have one name here now. And I think it's about time to start imagining the end of capitalism, because we've imagined the end of the world in so many ways And I think it's very much present, maybe not so much anymore with this new normality emerging right now, but that's what I meant when I said learning from emergencies. I think we have to harness that power that comes from that space to start shifting our thinking in creative ways, because there are no clear answers of how we can do that. Of course, there are millions of little answers, but for the whole huge thing to change, I don't know.
And that's getting to the deepest frames of our internal thinking. The radical change, right?
Yeah, yeah.
We have another question from Minka. Hi, Minka.
Hello. Thank you for your presentation. I was curious, in your research, what surprised you the most?
Wow. Okay, I'm going to use that pause and think option that I told you we had. I don't know if I have a cool answer to this, but definitely the whole research process in itself was surprising for me. But I guess this is just a very general kind of PhD student answer of how much there is. So the more you study and the more you learn, the more you understand how little you know, and that is a kind of a process of being at the same time more humble and proud, and that's a very weird thing. That's surprising, and maybe this proud aspect is just related to that it is actually feasible to be in this process and write something totally imperfect and with millions of ways to improve, but that is actually putting yourself out there kind of statement, and that works. That was surprising because for me it was a huge a journey into the unknown, I guess. Yeah, that was not a content answer, but more of a form answer. I hope that's okay.
I like it. Yeah, it's more meta. And for me, it's also somehow it's really related to the topic, because even, I don't know, it would be a bit filling in maybe, but this idea of like, wow, can I just write this stuff down? And I link it a bit to also a concept of like imposter syndrome, or a bit of fear of, wow, who am I to say things? And for me, that's also strongly related maybe to gender and these kind of things. So I find that also, yeah, very interesting. And myself as part of my thesis process, I can very much recognize it, even
Cool.
though it's just a master's thesis.
Thank you.
Thank you. I also have to go. We have deadline tonight.
Well, if there's no more, well, thank you, Minka. And I think with time, we've had a few that also had to go, Isa and Mamusu. Is there one last question, perhaps? If not, oh, okay, with Leah, yeah, she says, I'm really impressed by how well you explained everything. Every time I try to talk to someone about the relations of all those theories, I really struggle. Thank you very much for the great presentation. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Well, then, just a little text from Deep Germany. We are a nonprofit organization. If you'd like to make a donation, the information is in the chat. Otherwise, thanks everyone so much for coming, and thank you, Marisol, for taking the time and sharing your research with us today.
Thank you too.
Thank you.
My pleasure, really.